What he's talking about is here. If I get this right. Wait, where is it? Which one is it? Oh, it's my very first slide. There. Okay, the little spike over there is a Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum. There was an extinction event there which divides the geologic system of the Paleocene from the Eocene in the Cenozoic. And I don't know. What I'm trying to tell you is I'm not an Eocene paleontologist who can give an explanation as to what happened there. Okay, so you're going to have to find someone who is to answer the question. But I've heard explanations of everything from ocean overturn, which is where you have an overturn of the ocean releasing methane from clathrate deposits, so that is a methane response and not a CO2 response, but also evidence of increased volcanism. There was increased volcanism all through prior to, this is Cenozoic climate change, 65 million years to present. Mesozoic climate change, the CO2 levels were held high because of increased volcanism. It's a period in Earth's history that had increase in high volcanism. Everything from the Deccan traps in India and everything else erupting when the dinosaurs were living. And that held CO2 levels high, and it made for a climate that was 9 degrees centigrade warmer on average than our climate now, and things were radically different. If we talk about the Eocene, there are horse and alligator fossils on the island of Ellesmere Island, north of Greenland in the Canadian archipelago, from the Eocene.
Yeah, but Greenland or Ellesmere Island wasn't that far north then.
Yes, it was.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay.
The Arctic Ocean Basin opened from 65 million years ago. In fact, it was further north because the Arctic Ocean Basin opening the Lomonosov Ridge from the Mendeleev Ridge opened the Arctic Ocean Basin, driving the continent south over the last 45 million years. So the Arctic Ocean Basin was the last one to open. The Atlantic opened first, then the Arctic Ocean Basin. It drove the continents to further.
The point is that the tropical ocean temperatures looked like they were about 5 degrees C warmer than now, so far as
there is a different response in the equatorial data from the northern hemisphere data,
and there was a global release of methane. So the increase in infrared absorption in the atmosphere was massive, more than we can do, but we didn't get a runaway greenhouse effect.
John, I think that the question maybe that he's getting at is what he was saying is that if methane were to have been reduced from the tundra underneath Siberia, it should have happened at an earlier point if it was going to happen at all.
Well, if that was methane driven, it wouldn't be stable in the Earth's atmosphere. So you would have a period of years of methane-driven climate change.
I see what a faculty meeting's like.
I'm saying I don't know the answer to that because I'm not involved in that part of the climate, and you'll have to get an expert up here who is. This is my point. This subject is vast, and we're putting on dog and pony shows by trying to think that we can amalgamate 1,000 different scientific disciplines into one evening.
Well, let me toss in a semi-scientific discipline of political science. John, you want to stay up here? Because we're going to have you up later. We have a chair for you if you'd like. Okay. Or you can relax down there. Okay. Oh, wonderful. One of the other things that you mentioned in your data set there, or your slides, was you talked about how everything that the U.S. could do would not necessarily have that much of an effect. I think that was the 0.14 number that you came up with.
Not me, that's the EPA's model.
Okay, the EPA's number. But of course, we're not the only country in the world. Mm-hmm. And I presume that when we think about the industrialization of China, of India, and the increasing population of both as well, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and so on, that we are talking about a much more substantial increase because they are starting from a much lower point than the U.S. and Western Europe and Canada would be. Is that, am I correct in that?
I think you bring up a very, very interesting point. Be careful when you listen to people making pronouncements about global warming policy. You got to listen to the words carefully. For example, last November, there was an announcement, joint announcement. The president was in Beijing, and he announced that the Chinese had agreed to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. This is a big first. Well, when you read the terms of what they said. They said that they intend to stabilize their emissions of greenhouse gases around 2030. Now, the following marriage proposal would not go very well with Miss Rachel. Rachel, I intend to marry you somewhere around 5 years from now. It just wouldn't work. But that's what the Chinese said. And so the other thing is that the Chinese economy is maturing. I know there are economists in the crowd. I see one from Cal State Fullerton over there. And by the time they get to 2030, their economy is going to be mature in the sense that ours is mature, and so their emissions would naturally stabilize. So they didn't agree to do a darn thing. So the 0.14 degrees stands, and then the Secretary of State, he went to India, and then the President went to India and asked the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, to make a commitment to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions because India is going to be more populated than China in the not too distant future, by the way. And Mr. Modi said, no thanks. So
Okay.
the argument that, we aren't acting alone, well, actually, us and the Europeans are acting alone, and the Europeans are beginning to realize what this is doing to their industry.
Okay. We're edging more into areas where I can speak with some scientific basis. Do you think that there's a difference between the likelihood that the U.S. can show global leadership in encouraging other countries, even if they haven't made strong concessions yet, towards making strong concessions if we are taking some substantive actions ourselves rather than if we just basically...
Depends on who the president is. See, right now, again, I tried to point this out, that global warming policy cost the Democratic Party the control of the House of Representatives in the 2010 election.
Just if I can intercede there, just one moment.
Yeah.
So did passing the Voting Rights Act. Cost Lyndon Johnson and the Civil Rights Act, so that they lost the South for a generation. It's turned out to be 2 already.
Well,
so
yeah,
that's not a rebuttal of the importance of doing
I think
something.
There's an apple, an orange, and a horse and a cart somewhere in this room, and I can't quite figure out where they are in that argument. But the Obama energy policies, the price exacted for them were the loss of West Virginia's Senate seat, the loss of Alaska's Senate seat, and the loss of Louisiana's Senate seat. So that cost them the Senate. Now, as a result, the president is behaving essentially autocratically because of one Supreme Court decision, and that's what's providing the U.S. so-called leadership. I've been watching the polls. You watch the polls. But I look at the presidential approval index. There's a daily approval index that comes out of Rasmussen. A lot of people in Washington look at that index in the morning before they pee. I'm one. And I think very volatile are commitments on this. Don't you think?
Well, regardless of that, I come back to the question is, are we going to be more effective? If it is important for us to try to reduce carbon emissions, and I understand that that's a question for debate, are we going to be able to show greater leadership if we are trying to enforce an international norm that we ourselves are following than if we say, we're not going to make any movement, but we think that you, India, you, China, should do that. And I'm thinking especially, and this has national security implications as well, one of the countries that is the most threatened by global warming, one of the large countries anyway, I think one island, is it Nauru or Palau or whatever, is already taken the train out to the next island, is Bangladesh.
You're talking about Tuvalu.
Tuvalu, okay.
Yeah, and if you read the CIA fact book, you will see what happened in Tuvalu, and if you look in Science magazine, you'll see that, oddly enough, because of its location in the Pacific Ocean, there's actually very little sea level rise there at all.
Okay.
But what happened was that they mined the sand off their beach. to turn it into concrete, et cetera.
okay.
And that kind of lets the seawater come in a little bit more. So it was a human-induced disaster.
Okay. Not the same one as what you're saying, I understand. In Bangladesh, however, I know that they're quite worried about the possibility of rising seas,
Absolutely.
even to the relatively lower extent I think that you might predict.
Oh, no, I agree with that. And here's the cool part.
What do we do to get Bangladeshi cooperation in things, including in national security
You get your
issues?
hands out of their pockets, for gosh sake. The fact of the matter is that tropical cyclone would be equivalent to a Category 4 in hurricane. Whacked Bangladesh in the 1970s. I think it killed 230,000 people. A similar one hit a few years ago, and the death toll was around 1,000, even though the sea level had risen. What had happened was technological adaptation and economic development. You know, poor countries are very, very subject to the vagaries of weather and climate. All you have to do is go
We
around
are
the
susceptible as well. And there's only 2 minutes left in this, and I wanted to get a chance to put this up as my last slide. This is the Sandhills in Nebraska. This is the kind of impact that we might face in the central United States with our agriculture. These are sand dunes. I hear about the Sandhills. You learn about them as a geologist when the glaciers retreated from the United States.
Great place.
There was 10,000 years there since then, and for about the first 5,000 of that, there was very little vegetation, so the wind howled, and we ended up with 50 to 100 feet of less wind-blown silt deposits around Kansas City, and we also had the Sandhills. These things were reactivated in the Holocene maximum, climate optimum that we were talking about, and this paper recently came out that they were activated in the medieval warm period. What that means is we're talking about sand dune. I flew over them. I hear about them in school. I used to teach about them. But I never flew over them until I took a geodesic on an airplane from Minneapolis to San Francisco, and it took me right over the sand hills. These are sand dunes that you're flying over them for an hour on an airplane. So we're talking about the Rub al-Khali in the center of the United States. And I think that is due to intensification, or could happen again, with the intensification of the Hadley cell. But I'm going off into an area that he's an expert in.
Well, I agree the sandhills are really wonderful, and all the people that are affected by the changing climate and geology, because no one lives there.
No one lives there because it's blown sand. There's the Hadley cell.
Yeah.
Intensification of the Hadley cell. These things were reactivated in only 1,000 years ago in the medieval warm period.
I don't mean to get too in the weeds here, but weren't the sandhills actually the result of the circulation changes associated with the ice age? So they were a product of cooling, not warming?
No, they formed after the glaciers receded, and the vegetation
blew
had not
so
taken
much?
over the permafrost ground yet.
So what gave rise to the large wind speeds then? I'm just saying I don't know. Okay, I've read a lot on it, and it's pretty interesting stuff. So you get the idea about the importance of the words I don't know.
Okay, we're going to stay up here, and if we run out of questions, we may have a few more. But now, well, you're moderating. You can say what you